Well, thank you, of course, to the organizers. It's an extraordinary pleasure to be here. I've given a lot of talks, perhaps not as many as my colleagues, but I find it a challenge that I have to admit I was quite nervous about. How do you serve as the final act after 3 Nobel Prize winners, a Lasker Award winner, and apparently the woman who knows more about tortillas than anyone on earth? And so it's reassuring, I hope, in listening to the wonderful presentations and the ability for all of us, certainly including me, to hear these sorts of presentations in a several-hour period is, it's unrivaled. But what I found a little reassuring, and there was no planning involved, is that since I had no idea what I was supposed to talk about, I was a little afraid I would hear these talks and say, I am completely outclassed. Well, I might be, but surprisingly, I think this talk turns out in some ways to be a summary of many of the things you've heard already, and hopefully you'll find it interesting and perhaps add a little bit more to what you've already talked about. So the topic today is that age doesn't always bring wisdom, and unfortunately, sometimes age seems to come alone. And that's where I'd like to start. So, before I go on, I just want to point out that I think all of us have to acknowledge our weaknesses. I think I, like many people, have something which in English is called the imposter syndrome. I'm sure that there's something very similar in Hungarian, where you feel like no matter how accomplished you might be, you're not worthy somehow. And I think that's a characteristic of most successful people. I would like to thank the organizers for actually validating that I am completely unworthy when I compare my accomplishments to those of the people who've spoken already. So what can I do for you today? Well, I can tell you some good news and in a moment, of course, some bad news. The good news is that people are living longer. And you all, with the exception of us in the front, you all are at the beginning of your scientific careers. And had you been starting your scientific career in 1800, most of you would be more than, substantially past the halfway point of your life, since the average age of death in 1800 was 31. And yet another testament to the progress of science in many ways, the average age of life, at least through 2023 on this slide, was 73, more than doubled. And as you can see from the right panel, while it's not equally distributed around the world, literally everywhere in the world, length of life is increasing. And that's a benefit of the kinds of research that you're hearing about, whether it's the very fundamental work that some people have described or the more clinical kinds of things that I'm interested in and some of my colleagues. As I said, there's good news, and then, of course, there's bad news. And this is bad news for me, too. So the bad news is you better get at it fast. Because if you can see this curve, what you'll see is that around the age of 35, is when Nobel Prize winners and other people who made all sorts of great scientific contributions had their great idea. 35. Now, I don't know how true that is for this group, but the point is that you can't wait forever, and some of your best ideas might, in fact, be some of your first ideas. I think my chance at a Nobel Prize is infinitesimally small, because I'm well past that median age, and unfortunately I'm starting to be in the tail of curves now rather than in the middle, but I have high hopes for all of you. I think one of the themes that we've talked about is how important science is, and how important it is to find something that scientifically you're passionate about. It's very hard to pursue something for 10 years without success, convinced you're on the right track, unless you're passionate about it. But what none of the speakers so far, and certainly I don't think any of us have lost sight of the idea that your professional success is a tiny component of your life success and your life satisfaction. So I could have found many slides like this, but this one is representative, and you'll notice that professional success does not appear anywhere. Many things that we would all agree are important. Financial satisfaction, probably not the most important thing on there. Maybe that's a reflection of your professional success. But you have to be lucky to be healthy. You have to live in a safe place. Not everyone has that benefit. You have to like and feel safe around the people around you. You have to have hobbies. One of the things we've been talking about in the front is I need more hobbies, and we'll come to that. I'm extraordinarily impressed by the photographic interests of one of the presenters today, on top of all sorts of remarkable scientific ideas. So I would urge you to always keep an eye on how you're doing on this whole cycle of things, not just how's your job going. So school and work are important, but you and you alone are responsible for your own success. That changes over time, but ultimately you have to figure out how to make all the pieces of that first slide or the preceding slide work. And often, as you'll find, you're responsible as time goes by not only for yourself, but periodically for many others, your parents, children if you have them, etc. It's not just about you. So, without further ado, what are today's tasks, yours and mine? Well, mine are to provide some hopefully useful, maybe amusing, depends upon what you think is funny, ideas about how to move forward in life. Most of the additional quotations and other stories are related to gastroenterology, given my background. So a gastroenterologist at Albert Einstein, an institution already named Larry Brandt, who retired not that long ago, he said, my job is to talk, yours is to listen, and if you finish first, please leave quietly. So if any of you get bored, don't disturb your neighbors. You're welcome to go. I won't drone on for too long, I promise. Why should you listen to me? I don't have a life story that will culminate by accepting a prize from the King of Sweden. So what am I going to tell you that you haven't already heard from all of these other people? And why should you even pay attention to whatever it is I have to say? Through the surprising detective work of the organizers, many of the things on some of these slides you have already heard. And I did not see the laudation or any of the slides, so I'm quite impressed. But as you've probably heard, I'm a gastroenterologist. I have training in clinical epidemiology. I'm the chair of a big department. I'm the editor of a journal. And as you saw, I have lots of fancy titles from very fancy academic institutions. And that's great. In many ways, like my colleagues, I'm prouder of other things, though. I'm happily married, 35 years, same woman. So far, she continues to put up with me, God knows why. And I am the proud father of 2 children, both of whom got married in the last 6 months, which in some ways was a far greater accomplishment than running my department for a year, just to try to arrange 2 marriages in 6 months. What makes me a little different, certainly different perhaps than many of the people who've spoken so far today? I purposefully studied the bare minimum of science at university, on purpose. I knew what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to go into science. But I also thought, at least in the American system, I would never have a chance to learn all the other things. And God knows I hardly learned any of them. But all the other things, whether it's political science or economics or literature or a different language, I wanted to learn those things when I had a chance, because as time would go by and I became more focused on my career, I wouldn't have that chance. I didn't follow the standard career path, at least as American students tend to go, high school, college, medical school, residency, fellowship, job. I took time off, and you'll hear a little bit more about that in a moment. And in some ways, that was amongst, if not the most valuable time of my entire professional career. It sounds like heresy after the discussions you've heard, but I have never worked in a basic science laboratory in my professional career. I had a summer job or two. I had a god-awful job where I went to one of the slaughterhouses in Philadelphia to harvest the circle of Willis. That's the veins at the base of the brain. I had to go to a slaughterhouse every day where someone chopped the head off a cow, cut the skull off, and gave me the circle of Willis. If that doesn't make you want to go into the lab, I don't know what will. And finally, in some ways, I have avoided, at least recently, working in big, typically prestigious academic medical centers. You know, the United States is full of Harvards, and I've been there, and Penn, and I've been there, and, you know, Cornell, and I've been there. But for my professional career, I've chosen to work in smaller places, and that's had some real advantages. And it's not as simple as being a bigger fish in a smaller pond. There are some real advantages to just being in a smaller pond. The ability to form relationships with your colleagues, to know what's going on in the institution that you're working in. At Penn, people complain there are people 3 floors down who do something completely complementary to what they study, and they don't even know that that person is there. At Fox Chase's, I'll tell you, it's not that big a place. I know everybody, whether they push brooms or they're the president of the university or the institution, and that's, from my perspective, quite useful. You already saw a version of this slide. In English, there's a term called punching above your weight, which I think is a reference to boxing, where Fox Chase is a small institution. It punches way above its weight in terms of its scientific productivity. And over the years, here's a list of a variety of things that we've at least been partially responsible for, and that's pretty good by anybody's reckoning, but certainly for a place that is, quote, only a cancer hospital, with a faculty of about 300 people total, not bad. Here are some of those people. I suspect my colleagues in the front row know some of them. This is a useful slide. I could have shown you many other slides. So on the left, as you can read up on the bottom, is a guy named Bob Perry, who played a fundamental role in understanding RNA transcription. He didn't win any of the prizes that got you a little yellow bar on my slide. But he was part of this remarkable collection of scientists who would sit in the front row of every lecture. So when I was an assistant professor and I gave some talk about my research, Barry Blumberg, the next guy over, who won the Nobel Prize for hepatitis B, Al Knudsen, who most people thought should have won the Nobel Prize, but, quote, only won the Lasker, the Kyoto, the General Motors Prize, and a variety of others for the two-hit theory of cancer. Ernie Rose, who won the Nobel Prize, and then undoubtedly, the smartest of all of them was a woman on the end named Bea Mintz, who won the Yorgi Prize. Bea today would be a very interesting role model for everyone, but particularly for the women in the audience. Bea died last year at the age of 100. She never married, she never had children. No one ever saw her not in her laboratory. She got a PhD at the University of Chicago as a woman in 1952, where she worked with some remarkable people. And she has played an absolutely seminal role in understanding transgenic processes, initially in mice and then in humans, the SCID mouse. It's a long list. And she scared the crap out of the rest of these guys because she was much tougher than they were. And she was the person I worried about when a question got asked from the front row. It wasn't Barry Blumberg. He was no slouch either. It was Bea. So part of the message here is you have to be ready. You know, you're young, you don't think you're worthy. These guys, to make you better, had no problems asking very critical questions. They weren't trying to embarrass you. Somebody's going to ask the critical question about your manuscript. You'd rather it come from your colleagues so that you can make it better than before you send it to me, where I have no particular relationship with you and I'm just going to reject the paper if it's not good. You send it through this ringer before you send it to me, you're going to be in much better shape. So, switching to a story. In this story, the young fish are you guys. In this case, I'm the old fish. So 2 young fish are swimming when they meet an older fish who nods and says, "Good morning, how's the water?" And the two young fish swim on a little while, and when one of them says to the other, "What the hell is water?" So what does this mean? This means that you live in an environment that unless you're careful, you never examine it. You never think, could it be different somewhere else? One of the problems with the institution that I work in these days is that we don't have enough people coming from other places to cross-pollinate our thinking, to make us look at problems in a different way. And if you're not aware that you've gotten into these habits of just, as it were, taking the environment that you're in for granted and how you do things for granted, you will be in trouble. So I would urge you to recognize you are in an environment, but it's not the only one that's out there. And you, and certainly the other people around you, have an opportunity to change it. So I've started to talk about this, but science undoubtedly is a virtuous calling. But mostly at this point, you talk about science and you think about science and you hang out with science people, and that's important. That's the world you live in. Remember, there are other worlds. And the science world that you live in, you have to be open to the idea that it can change, that people can have new ideas, that you should have new ideas. Now, when you're training, like most of you are, that's not easy, because to some degree, you do what you're told. So how did I get here? How did you get here, or at least how are you going where you're going? Well, I think all of us share some common experiences. In school, we took a lot of courses, the ones they told you to take. You read the books that you were supposed to because they told you to. You took the tests they told you that you had to take, and they told you when you had to take them, and they told you basically you had to do at least this well or you were in trouble. You did the projects, all that. Somebody gave you a map, you studied it, you followed it, and to some degree, you mastered it. Well, guess what? At some point, there is no more map, and that's what everyone up here the last couple of hours has been telling you. If you think you know how you're going to go from A to B, you're fooling yourself. There's an old joke about how do you make God laugh? Tell him you have a plan. So I think we all have plans. We all have things we want to do. But to be closed to the idea that you may wish to go another direction or be forced to go to another direction is something you have to embrace rather than being scared by it. But ultimately, there isn't a map unless you draw it yourself. So I have a couple of suggestions. Some of them are more obvious than others, and they're in no particular order. So first off, humor is good. Laughing at yourself is good. Being able to laugh with others is good. Occasionally laughing at others is good, but probably not as much as the first two. But laughter is important. Enjoying yourself is important. As Tim Hunt was telling you a few minutes ago, have fun. This is serious stuff you're doing, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't have fun. Second, and this is a little different, lighten up. Don't take yourself quite so seriously. You are more successful already than most people your age. You work sometimes in a stressful, and you certainly live these days in a stressful and occasionally depressing world. However, what you're interested in has the potential to do more good than the average investment banker will ever do in his or her life, although you will be paid less money to do that. And as I said, laughing at yourself, sometimes mostly at yourself, is important. In English, there's a term called inject some levity. Levity is a little different than humor. Levity means a lightness of mind or character or behavior. And as I've said now several times, a posture of not taking everything so seriously. So you should live with some levity in your life. And there have been a million studies that show that people who take this philosophy have a greater level of optimism. They feel more in control of their own lives. They're less depressed. They're less stressful. They're less anxious. And as all of you can imagine, they're a whole hell of a lot more fun to be with than somebody who is constantly the most serious person in the room. So how do you do this? Well, Don't be afraid to laugh. Don't be afraid to appreciate things that are amusing. When you're in a bad mood and someone tries to make you laugh and make you feel better, sometimes your initial reaction is to go, leave me alone. I don't want to lighten up. I want to feel bad. I want to wallow in my dissatisfaction. Well, that's tempting, and you will face many unhappy and dissatisfying moments in your life, but at some point you have to pick yourself up and move on. So when something goes wrong, and it will, I'm not saying be completely foolish in your life. There are serious things that happen, and you have to take them seriously. But you should try to spend time with people who make you laugh and get to understand your own sense of humor, because obviously that varies from one person to another. What was another theme that came up? All of these pictures, with rare exceptions that my colleagues have shown, don't show them by themselves. They show them with other people they worked with. You are not doing this yourself. Science, these days in particular, is a team exercise. Fox Chase, the place I worked for years, was characterized by a certain amount of siloing, meaning here's the people who do this, and here's the people who do this, and those two people, or those two groups, don't talk to each other. Most science these days is conducted as a team sport. And you need to find colleagues who complement your skills, not necessarily replace them, but complement them. It's good to ask for help. How many times did you hear, I don't know anything about this, so I found someone who did? And of course, I think probably your mother told you this, it's better to admit you don't know something than to act like you know something when you don't. That can only get you into trouble. You're going to make mistakes. I can guarantee it. Ben Franklin, who seemed to have said everything in the United States at some point, said, never ruin an apology with an excuse. If you did something wrong, and you will, then admit you did something wrong. There's no shame in that. It's to then, how many times have you talked to someone and said, well, it's because of this, or this, or this, or this, or this, when in fact, life would have been so much simpler if they just said, I made a mistake, I'm sorry, I'll try not to do it again. That would be better. Now, in the idea of living with a little levity in your life, there's a guy named Al Franken who was on Saturday Night Live, and then in a strange twist of life, went on to become the senator of the state of Minnesota, an odd combination. So he said, appreciate mistakes for what they are, life lessons that can only be learned the hard way. Unless it's a fatal mistake, then at least others can learn from them. Okay. Next, trust your judgment. This one is incremental. Your judgment now is not as good as your judgment will be. This is my son when he was 2. He was really cute. That's a living room of a house we sold years ago. And there he was drawing, and not his greatest work. But I wouldn't have trusted him to go out the front door by himself, of course. Fast forward to 19 years, or when he's 19, so 17 years later, his mother and I felt comfortable enough sending him off to Italy for 6 months to study architecture. So maybe the drawing of the first slide was somehow a premonition of what would happen in the second. And something perhaps more familiar to some of you, my family are big skiers, that's my son. I taught him to ski. I remember having him ski when I'm holding him between my legs and I'm going backwards down the mountain, very small slope for this part, and he's there. By this point of his life, I'm still a pretty good skier, but he's better. And I actually trust him to lead me down some of the tougher trails on the mountain. Now again, I don't take him too seriously even to this day, so here he is with a dog of ours. He did get married, not, of course, to the dog, and I am fairly confident that he has made a great personal choice. And I don't think parents ever completely let go of their children, but I'm pretty confident he's launched, so to speak, and will do quite well. Find a mentor. This is a tough one. It's an easy thing to suggest and a hard thing to do. So you saw a picture already of Dave Rogers. This is my mentor. You saw some of his extraordinary accomplishments. He was the chairman of the Department of Medicine at Vanderbilt, which is a big university in the United States, at the ripe old age of 32. He was the dean of the medical school at Hopkins at the age of 47. He also integrated Hopkins. Hopkins is in the southern part of the United States. He hired the first African-American resident. That was brave, very brave, not only for the resident, but for Dave Rogers. He left Hopkins to run something called the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, which is a huge healthcare foundation in the US. And I was lucky enough to meet him when he came back to Cornell, where I went to medical school, and he had too many years before. And his background is infectious disease, and he came back to Cornell as a minister without portfolio. You know, he had no specific job. He was just a smart guy who had also won the Lasker Award. I mean, he was no slouch. So Dave was asked to worry about a little infectious disease problem in New York City in 1984 called AIDS. I was lucky enough to wander into his office serendipitously. I took time off from medical school. I wanted to learn how public policy was made. I was not going to learn that in my biochemistry class. I got an invitation through the dean. I don't remember how I wrangled that. And I went and I talked to Dave, and I said, I want to learn how public policy is made. And he said, well, I need help. I'm supposed to do this whole project for the city of New York and later the state of New York and ultimately for the country to try to figure out how you should make AIDS policy for various levels of government. Dave was about 70. He was the whitest white male from the most Christian of backgrounds you can imagine. The reason I mention those things is that in 1982 in the United States, if Dave Rogers walked down Christopher Street in New York City, which was loaded with gay bars, he would have stuck out like a sore thumb. But you needed to understand what was happening to the people who got AIDS. So he sent me. Not for public discussion, but I can tell you many, many interesting stories. But what did I learn? I learned a couple things. I learned to speak up for myself. So Dave Rogers asked me to do all of these interesting things, which they're not physically risky for me, but they were uncomfortable for me. So I said that the deal was I would do all these things for him. I would be his ears. I would be his arms and legs. And in exchange, I would go anywhere he would go. So if he went to talk to the governor of New York, I went to talk to the governor of New York. If he went to talk to the mayor of New York, I went to talk to the mayor of New York. I was a 21-year-old medical student. I'm not sure that if my children asked me, so should you be so forward-thinking with this guy who you've now known for an hour, whether that was good advice. It turned out to work. And in one of the things that I found most flattering of the many nice things, and often not nice things, people have said about me, one of the nicest things I ever heard, many years later, not from Dave, was an explanation for why he had accepted my deal. And apparently he told the person he was talking to that I reminded him of himself when he was younger. Ambitious, enthusiastic, probably a little brash, but willing to do and try and learn things. And he thought this was great. And so the end result of this, and then we'll move on to some of the things that characterized his qualities as a mentor, was that he was always more interested, and I'll talk about this in a moment, more interested in me and my success than him and his success. So the end result of this was that at the age of 21, I had a first author paper in the New England Journal where it took exactly 7 days from the day we submitted it to the day it appeared in print. Trust me, it wasn't me, it was him. Okay, it was connections. It was knowing the right person and who to call and to vouch for me. But I will also point out that his name was not on the paper. And we'll come back to that in a moment. So what are the characteristics, at least in my mind, of good mentors? And this is what you all should be looking for, because if you're lucky and you can find this, then grab it. Even if it means speaking up a little more than perhaps you're not as comfortable as you'd like to be doing. One, if you want someone to share their wisdom with you, they have to have some wisdom to share. So just being older doesn't mean you're wiser. If there's a whole theme here, I suspect that's it in a nutshell. So look for someone who seems to be thoughtful and introspective and willing to think outside their own limitations. Two, you need to be able to be honest about your own life and your own circumstances, the things that scare you, the things that excite you. If you can't confidently tell that to your mentor and be confident that that very private information will be used in the right way and in the right way only, you've probably found the wrong person. I'm not sure I would have told Dave Rogers everything, but I could tell Dave Rogers an awful lot and feel confident that I would get good advice and it would be heard in a useful way. If you're brave enough to ask for advice, your mentor needs to be brave enough to give it to you straight. And that seems a little odd until you think about it, but it's very hard when someone, at least in my life, comes to me and asks for advice. I still find it difficult to just tell them not only what they want to hear, but fairly directly and hopefully constructively what they don't want to hear. No one ever feels comfortable giving someone criticism, at least no one who's thoughtful who's ever been criticized themselves. Your mentor should be curious. If there's anything that characterizes every single person who spoke before me today, it's curiosity, right? Always curious, always asking questions, always interested in something new. And then finally, generosity of spirit. So I told you about the New England Journal story. The probably the even more standard, in my mind, story of Dave Rogers' generosity was that I begged him as our time was coming to an end to give me a photographic portrait. He had a picture of his mentor in his office. I always thought that was wonderful. I wanted a picture of him. And he had told me over and over, you don't need a picture of me. You know, you've learned everything you need to learn that I can teach you. It's not about me, it's about you. And I, Dave Rogers, at this point in my life, and I'd like to think I've reached this point in my life, I, Dave Rogers, get my greatest pleasure from the success of the people that I've taken an interest in. The light doesn't have to shine on me. If it shines on you, it reflects on me, and that's more than enough. I don't need another paper. I don't need another grant, all that. It's great. So finally, I convince him to give me a photograph, and I go on the last day that we're going to meet regularly, and he gives me this beautiful wrapped package, and I say, is that the photograph? And he says, yes. And I say, shall I open it now? He says, no, take it home and open it. That seemed like him. So I took it home, and I ripped it open, expecting to find this beautiful portrait of just, Dave Rogers like this. And he has given me a picture of Dave Rogers with Nelson Mandela. So I have this picture in my office of Dave Rogers with Nelson Mandela. And as you've heard, Dave died many years ago. But no one ever comes into my office and says, why do you have a picture of Dave Rogers? They always say, why do you have a picture of Nelson Mandela in your office? So somewhere Dave Rogers is laughing, saying, you asked for this picture of me, but no one's ever going to ask about me. They're going to always ask about you. And I thought that was just a remarkably generous, funny maneuver on his part. You've seen a lot of movie references, I noticed. So anybody know this one? Okay, Kill Bill, right? So it's a long time ago. Uma Thurman has not looked quite that young for a while. But professional success doesn't make a good mentor. I think I've said that already. So what are the characteristics of bad mentors? Well, they have lousy communication skills. They refuse to make a commitment to you, a continuing, enduring commitment to you, not just of time, but also of energy. You could have personality differences with your mentor. That's probably the kiss of death. One of the things about Dave Rogers that I liked, and I've made reference to this already, is I wasn't in competition with him. He was not in competition at all. He was very confident, as he should be. He had a healthy ego, but he was very confident, as he should be, that his successes were clear. My successes gave him pleasure, but they were my successes, not his. He didn't need to have his name on the New England Journal paper. He was fine without it. And mentors that don't have much experience, of course you have to start to get it sometime, but mentors who don't have much experience or knowledge or contacts, like I can call Bud Relman, the editor of the New England Journal, and say, I've got this paper and you guys should publish it. That's helpful if your mentor has that kind of sway. What about the relationship between mentors and mentees? Well, we heard a little of this too. How can I miss you if you won't go away? At some point, your relationship day in and day out with your mentor is over. And you have to begin to carve your own path. And if you can't do that, if you keep studying the same area, you'll never differentiate yourself. If you can't identify something that is yours and not his or hers, meaning his or her, your mentor, then you can't probably ever succeed. So, you have to trust your own judgment and you have to draw your own map. Learn to fail. How many times did we hear that people failed over and over for extended periods of time? Most of you probably haven't failed much yet. Trust me, your time will come. And sometimes you'll fail when you've done absolutely everything right. And that doesn't seem fair, but that's the way life is. So, I don't know where this is from, but I think it makes the point. No one is special if you failed. And the true secret is fall 7 times and stand up 8. So I tell people who work with me who send in a grant and they get a lousy score or their paper gets rejected, and I say, you can feel sorry for yourself for 24 hours. But when you come back to the office tomorrow, you better have stood up and dusted yourself off and come up with a solution for what are you going to do next. To just sit there and say the world is not fair and I failed, I have no time for that, and nor should you. Keep your priorities straight. I think we've also talked about this. Literally every one of the people who presented today showed something from the rest of their life. Often it was a picture of family, grandchildren, which I suspect I'll have someday, but don't yet, or hobbies, or something that shows that they have a well-rounded life and they care about other things. I think that, Danny Shechtman's talk, he actually said exactly my last bullet. What's more important, your family or your job? If that is ever a question in your mind, I think you have a problem. Your job is extraordinarily important, but your family is more important. Hands down. Don't make the mistake that many people make, which is they think that the bonds of their family can last forever, and the dad or the mom doesn't need to try to go to the ballet recital or the baseball game or something, or God forbid, miss a birthday party, thinking, oh, he'll forgive me. Well, they might, but you don't want to run that risk, and you don't want to miss the birthday party. It's going to be a lot more fun than practically anything else you could do. This is a guy named Tom Brasitis. He was the chairman of GI at the University of Chicago. And I went to a meeting one time when I was much younger, and he stood up and he gave a talk kind of like this about mentoring. And he was asked what was important, and he said, I don't do anything that doesn't make my CV longer. Okay. This guy, Bob Sandler, stood up right after him with a prepared talk. You could basically see Bob Sandler mentally tearing up his talk to follow a jerk like Brasitis. And he said, and I remember it because Brasitis sort of slunk off the stage, Brasidas said, "That is the stupidest advice I have ever heard." No one is going to put on your gravestone, "He wrote 400 papers. He got a big grant." What do they put on your gravestone? Wonderful husband, wonderful father, great mother, something. It is never, or very rarely, and never alone, your professional accomplishments. So if Tom Brasidas' yardstick of success is how long is his CV, then you need another mentor because he's not your guy either. Hang out with the right people. There was a quote earlier on about you should, where's Tim? You should hang out with people who are cleverer than you. Well, there was never better advice than that. You are unbelievably fortunate if you're the stupidest person in the room. It can only make you better. You should seek out those opportunities. You will be better for it. And then find a significant other, speaking of imposter syndromes, find a significant other who makes you feel unworthy. Like, how did I get so lucky? How do I keep this marriage going? Why does she put up with me? Questions I still ask after 35 years. I'm the luckiest guy on earth in that regard, except for other people who feel exactly the same way I do, and hopefully you will be one of those people. And then last but not least, try to stay interesting. I was really very interesting once. I could talk about art. I could talk about lots of things that were not science. I really enjoyed going to museums and looking at Impressionist art and being able to think about it and talk about it with knowledge. That gets harder to do, not the Impressionist part, anything. That gets harder to do as you focus more on your career and more as your world gets a little smaller and you have a family to worry about. But that doesn't mean that you should lose sight of it. I was saying to my friends in the front row, one of the things that's keeping me, although I don't think I'll do it anytime soon, from retiring or slowing down is what would I do to fill the time? I can pretend I know. I'll learn to play the saxophone. I will, I've been trying to teach myself Norwegian, another long story. It's not going very well. But the point is, you need to have other interests. You need to have other hobbies. And if you suddenly discover them once your professional career is over and you wake up one day saying, I'm not going to the lab anymore, I'm not going to the office anymore, and that ended Friday and now it's Monday, and what am I going to do? I don't want to be in that position. I do fear if I were to do it right now, that's where I would be. So one of my pieces of homework is to try to figure out, besides very bad Norwegian, what my how I'm going to rekindle interest in Impressionist art or anything else that I think of. So in conclusion, you guys are at a wonderful point in your life. You're starting on a pathway that could take you anywhere. You're in control. You will do great things. Not necessarily the great things that you think you're going to do today, but you can still do great things. You're going to need to make some sacrifices. Do not sacrifice your personal life for your professional life. Too many people do that, and I am certain they regret it. Work hard to have a wide set of interests and friends and activities, and in some ways that will ultimately be the most important piece of advice that I can give you. So hopefully staying until 6:30 and listening to some guy who hasn't won all these fancy prizes was worthwhile, and I'm happy to, if you still have the energy, answer any questions that people have.
Thank you very much, David, for this thought-provoking lecture. Unfortunately, we won't have time for questions because we have to get to the theater a bit earlier than the planned opening, since the president of Hungary is also attending, and due to security issues, we have to get there before that time. So if there are any questions, actually you can ask David in the theater. Whoever is coming to the theater, there will be buses departing in front of the arena. And also I understand that about 800 of you are actually going back home. And if you became interested in the program of the National Academy of Scientist Education. Please join the program, contact your teachers as well, and get enrolled in the bronze and silver diploma, and thereafter you can come to attend this conference for even 3 days as well. Thank you very much for your attending. We also want to present the certificate of appreciation to David